So I was recently doom scrolling on Twitter as you do, and I came across this post by Invader Moon which says, okay, calling for all you geniuses out there, I have my LED sign that I definitely want to keep up in my setup, but it's too bright and lights up my room for my videos too much. I can't use a dimmer on the controller or it flickers and will mess with the camera. Is there any way I can dim it or darken it? Honestly, this is a super common problem in the live streaming and content creation space because a lot of us obviously like to have lights behind us because it adds some color, it adds some interest, it adds some personality to our setups. So today I'm going to be talking about how you can actually set up your camera and things you can do to avoid your lights flickering in your videos. The main problem with lights like this is they obviously look great in your setup, but they aren't really designed for filming or to look perfect on camera, especially compared to like professional lights like the ones that I have behind me. The electronics used in these cheaper LED signs usually aren't as good, which can cause problems like flickering or banding when you try to dim them for your videos. This flickering usually happens because your camera shutter speed is out of sync with the alternating current in your house. So in America, you're obviously using 60 Hz power, so in theory your shutter speed should be 1/60 to avoid any flicker. And here in the UK, we use 50 Hz power, so our shutter speed should be 1/50 instead. You've probably noticed that when you're actually using your lights at like full brightness, usually everything syncs up fine, so you won't notice any problems, there'll be no flickering or anything happening on camera. But it's when you start to dim them down that's when kind of problems arise. Lights that use cheaper parts usually use something called PMW to lower the brightness instead of changing the actual current going to the light. So when you actually dim your light, what's effectively happening is that it's pulsing. The LEDs are going on and off quicker than normal, which to our eyes will make it look dimmer. But on camera, it actually causes it to flicker, which obviously doesn't look very good. So now that you actually know what's causing the problem, what can you do to try and fix it? Well, you've got a couple of options which are kind of limited because you are fighting physics and electricity, which isn't always the easiest battle to win. But the first of which is, as I mentioned earlier on, change the shutter speed of your camera. Try to make it match the electrical frequency in your country. So obviously if you're in the USA, have it 1/60. But you might be able to get away with having it divisible by that number as well. So 1/60 should work, but you could also drop it down to 1/30 because that sometimes will fix it because the shutter is then open a little bit longer, which kind of blends the flickering a little bit and it can sometimes fix your issue. The only downside of doing this is, well, it might make your images a little bit more motion blurry. So if you're someone that moves around a lot or you're filming like sports, I don't know, that could be an issue. But for most people who are just doing talking head stuff like this or a live stream, not going to be a problem. So shooting at 1/30 or 1/25 if you're in the UK might fix your issue. The second way to fix it is to change your actual light from AC power to DC power, which obviously isn't the easiest thing to do, but some lights do have a plug but also have battery power, so switching it to battery mode means that you're actually going to avoid that flicker because DC is direct current, meaning it's constantly just one like amount of power going through it at all times, so you shouldn't get the flickering issue. I've heard of some people sometimes buying transformers and attaching them to lights, but that seems really complicated and maybe expensive, and I'm not an electrician and I don't know if it works, so don't quote me on that one. But if you know anything about electricity, then maybe a transformer might work. And the last two options come down to leaving the light at full power, because obviously we know that at full power you avoid any flicker, but you still now need to make that light dimmer. So the first option is to buy something called ND filter or an ND gel, which is basically like a plastic sheet that you can kind of hang over your light and it will cut the amount of light coming through, making it darker in the background. You can buy it in like big rolls and sheets and stuff, which is obviously great for panels or square shaped things or even tubes because obviously you can roll it around it. But for these neon lights, not ideal because they're normally weird shapes, so you'd have to like cut it out or have it look a little bit messy, which it will work, but it just might not look very aesthetic, which is kind of what those lights are designed for. And last but not least, the best way, or at least my favorite way of fixing all of this, is by using lighting and exposure in your camera. Because obviously I've added the floodlight behind me to kind of demonstrate this, which if I try and dim down the weird banding flickery thing, which doesn't look very good, no one wants this on their content, no one wants to watch this for hours on end. So have it as high up as possible, turn the power the whole way up so that you stop any flickering happening behind you, but this is now too bright. So the only way we can fix this is by changing the exposure in our camera so that our background is darker. And do that with either an ND filter or change the ISO of your camera. You don't want to change the shutter speed because that's going to make it flicker again, and you don't want to change the aperture because you'll lose the nice blurry background. So for me, I'm going to use my ND filter and drop that down so my background is exposed about where I want it to be, which is now looking good, but I'm too dark. So to fix that, I now need to make the light in front of me a little bit brighter. So I'm going to change my light from 10%, probably up to about 15 or so. Now that I've changed everything, my background isn't completely overexposed. It's not flickering. It doesn't look terrible. And also, I'm not too dark, which has fixed the entire issue. Anyway, hopefully that was useful and you managed to fix your lighting issues. It was also kind of fun doing a reply to a post I saw on Twitter. So if you have any problems or issues you want me to cover, post a video or a photo and tag me on Twitter and I'll try and do something similar in the future. And in the meantime, check out these videos about content creation and live streaming, and I'll see you all in the next one.